Is this Europe's moment? If Donald Trump will not lead the world on climate change, other leaders say they will. Final push, the last weekend of campaigning in the UK ahead of next week's defining vote. And where's the love? The Black Eyed Peas say it's still in Manchester, despite the deadly terror attack. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Cyril Vanier, live from the CNN newsroom in Atlanta. So U.S. President Donald Trump may have jump-started a new global environmental movement. The world reaction to the president pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord has been overwhelmingly negative. Political and business leaders across the U.S. and beyond have responded by promising to honor their commitments to the Paris Agreement, even if the U.S. government does not. Here's CNN's Jim Acosta.
Thank you very much, everybody.
The climate was warming at the White House as officials from the president to the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt,
does the president believe today that climate change is a hoax?
Dodged the question.
Does the president believe that climate change is real and a threat to the United States?
You know what's interesting about all the discussions we had through the last several weeks have been focused on one singular issue. Is Paris good or not for this country?
Pruitt echoed President Trump's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement as a choice in favor of American workers.
They don't put America first. I do, and I always will.
But the head of the EPA also took some jabs at what he described as climate exaggerators, the kind of language used by global warming skeptics.
You are up there throwing out information that says, well, maybe this is being exaggerated and so forth, and you're talking about climate exaggerators. It just seems to a lot of people around the world that you and the president are just denying the reality. And the reality of the situation is that climate change is happening, and it is a significant threat to the planet.
Let me say this, and I've said it in the confirmation process, and I said it yesterday. And
right, no, the Arctic ice and the sea levels.
We have done a tremendous amount as a country to achieve reductions in CO2. And we have done that through technology and innovation. We will continue to do that. We will continue to stay engaged.
They were a little worried that you're putting your head in the sand.
Well, there's no evidence of that.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer told reporters earlier this week that he would check on whether the president still believed climate change is a hoax, as he stated in the past. Did Spicer have a chance to clear that up with the president?
I have not had an opportunity to have that discussion.
Spicer and Pruitt joined a growing list of top administration officials dancing around the climate question.
Does President Trump still believe climate change is a hoax?
What President Trump believes is he was elected to grow the U.S. economy and provide great job opportunities.
Does the president still believe global warming is a hoax?
The president believes in a clean environment, clean air, clean water.
Overseas, there were some notable reactions to the president's decision from French President Emmanuel Macron, who invited American scientists to move to France.
Because wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
To Russia's Vladimir Putin, who appeared to defend Mr. Trump's choice.
We should not create a big noise on this issue.
On the subject of Russia, there are other pressing questions facing the White House, such as whether the president will invoke executive privilege to block former FBI Director James Comey from testifying on Capitol Hill next week. Spicer said that's up in the air.
It's got to be reviewed.
But he insisted the president is standing by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, amid questions about the White House advisor's dealings with the Russians.
Absolutely.
And the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt made it clear to reporters that the president is open to starting a new round of negotiations for a new Paris climate deal. But over the last 24 hours, in response to the president's announcement, world leaders, including key U.S. allies, have said that's not happening. Jim Acosta, CNN, the White House.
Joining me now for more on this is CNN political analyst and history professor at Princeton University, Julian Zelizer. Julian, there's a lot of news today. Let me first touch on global warming and Donald Trump pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Accord. Let me show you some numbers, and in particular the concern that is expressed by Democrats and Republicans about global warming. 66% of Democrats, two-thirds, say they are greatly concerned about this. only 18% of Republicans, less than a third, say they're concerned about this. So to what extent do you think that was a political move by Donald Trump, knowing that it's not going to hurt him with his base?
Yeah, this is a president who, for much of what he's done right now, plays to the base. So he finds the issue where the base is passionate. This is one of those issues, not believing in climate change, arguing that regulations have to stop, and hoping that as he plays to the base, enough Republicans will come along in the end. Because even if they don't agree with him on something like climate change, they still prefer Republicans over Democrats. That's the bet. But this certainly created a lot of fallout, and there is a lot of concern among voters in both parties about the implications of withdrawing from this agreement.
Yeah, and it's remarkable. In fact, the numbers, and that's a Gallup poll in March that we just showed you, there's a bigger partisan gap on the issue of global warming than there is on almost any other national issue that faces the U.S. That includes race relations, illegal immigration. So the degree of concern over that is a lot bigger between Democrats and Republicans on global warming than on anything else. That said, back to my first question, do you think Donald Trump is essentially doing this on his belief that global warming isn't that big a deal or big a danger for the U.S., or do you think it's politics for him?
I think it's both. I mean, I think it plays into the politics of the base and using that as the basis of your presidency. But of all the issues he's talked about, other than fighting illegal immigration, fighting against regulations to curb climate change have been very important to him. He's used executive power to already roll back many regulations President Obama put into place domestically to curb emissions, carbon emissions.
Thank you very much.
And he has spoken for a long time. This is not a surprise that he was going to withdraw the U.S. from this. So I actually think this is one of those core beliefs. He does not believe the regulatory infrastructure we have tried to create as a nation and as a world to curb the threat of climate change is a good idea.
Julian, let's move on to the Russia investigation and specifically the hearing of former FBI Director James Comey that's set for Thursday. The noise we're hearing that's coming out of the White House and advisors to Donald Trump is that the U.S. president may try to invoke executive privilege to stop James Comey from testifying. I mean, what are the politics of that and what are the optics of that?
Well, the politics will be difficult, in part because of his own tweets. I think President Trump has provided Congress and the courts with enough fodder through his tweets about why he got rid of FBI Director Comey and what he thought about the Russia investigation to create legitimate suspicion about why all this took place. And that undercuts some of his ability to use executive privilege. The optics look bad. When you are being accused of obstruction of justice, if you then try to obstruct the investigation into that by using the power of the presidency to stop it, it just fuels a picture that you have something to hide. There are many voters and many members of Congress who will think if there is nothing to hide, then be forthcoming. But this is not an administration that's being forthcoming.
The French president has been among the most vocal critics of President Trump. Aged 39, Emmanuel Macron, who came to power less than a month ago, is not just protecting the Paris Climate Accord. He's also trying to demonstrate strength on the international stage. Here's how with Melissa Bell's report.
It's hard to believe that it was less than a month ago. On May 7th, Emmanuel Macron became the youngest man ever to be elected to France's presidency.
Let me say a few words to our American friends.
Also, the first ever to make speeches in English publicly, which was to come in handy very quickly.
Wherever we live, whoever we are, we all share the same responsibility. Make our planet great again.
So we're getting out. The United States will cease.
It was a stinging rebuke to what Donald Trump had just announced in the Rose Garden.
Accord. I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
Within hours, Macron's call was the most widely shared tweet ever from a French account, leading the French press to ask whether the French president was now the new leader of the free world. For a newly elected 39-year-old, Emmanuel Macron's first steps on the world stage were remarkably sure.
Congratulations, great job.
As was his handshake with the American president. A handshake that was, said Macron later, far from innocent.
Thank you very much.
He'd wanted to show his strength. Days later, Emmanuel Macron welcomed to Versailles another leader with whom he shares little in terms of outlook. Vladimir Putin also got a firm handshake and a challenge that few had had the courage to deliver so directly before.
I precisely indicated to President Putin the intentions of France concerning LGBT people in Chechnya. We came to the agreement to follow this matter closely together. President Putin indicated he will be taking up measures to investigate the actions of local authorities in Chechnya on this issue, and I will be staying on top of this and following up.
It isn't just that Emmanuel Macron speaks English, it's that he speaks for a vision that has seemed a thing of the past these last few months. A vision based on common values rather than individual interests. A vision that appears to have a new champion. Melissa Bell, CNN, Paris.
And joining me now is Washington correspondent for The Economist, James Astle. James, pleasure to have you on the show. We just saw how the French president, Emmanuel Macron, is standing up to Donald Trump. Add to that the recent statements by the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, that Europe must take its destiny into its own hands. It can't rely on past allies. And she was talking about the U.S. Is there, in your opinion, a moment for Europe to seize here, to emerge as a larger global voice?
Well, I think, yes, there is that moment, that space, and it's been created by the extraordinary low standard that Donald Trump is setting by America's own lights for internationalism, for a responsible worldview, and for defense of that very international liberal architecture that America set up after the Second World War. So certainly Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron are now important leaders arguing for those very things that Donald Trump, America's president, no longer seems terribly supportive of.
And you add Brexit to the mix. It seems like what was once considered a factor that would weaken Europe, now you add that to the mix, and it looks like it could have been the best thing that happened to the European Union. I'm not talking about Brexit specifically. I'm talking about this perfect storm of circumstances. What do you make of that argument?
I don't think there's much to that argument. I think that Brexit has clearly weakened the European Union. Arguably, it will weaken the UK even more, but nonetheless, Britain brought a degree of economic sanity, rationalism to EU arguments, and also a very superior security apparatus to Europe, including through the European Union, through its diplomacy there, that the EU will be bereft without. So certainly Brexit is damaging to the EU. Whether EU leaders feel that they can sort of cut loose and be more aggressive towards America now that Britain is no longer, or will shortly no longer be part of the EU, I suppose it's an argument, but I'm not sure I buy it. There was always a sense...
I think, James, what that argument says is that Europe can speak with a louder voice now, that it doesn't have the sort of the contrarian members of the club, and that was the case for Brexit, and it's also the case in some respect with Donald Trump, now that there isn't this close relationship with the American president.
No, Europe has never spoken with one voice. The dominant Franco-German voice within the EU was always somewhat distinct from the British voice, and the Franco-German voice sort of sought to represent the EU in the way that the British voice never did. So I think that there was always that tension, and there still will be. It's not clear that Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron speak for all the members of the EU. Nonetheless, this is a moment when Britain, especially as it heads into a general election, doesn't have strong leadership, isn't willing to confront the American retreat from its global role as other European leaders think that it should. And Macron, with his splendid victory behind him, and Angela Merkel don't have those inhibitions. So this is a moment, certainly, when those two leaders are speaking with a loud and clear voice, and Britain is not. But I wouldn't see that that is a lasting dynamic which has redefined Europe.
James Astle, thank you very much. Washington correspondent for The Economist. Still to come on CNN Newsroom, just 5 days of campaigning until Britain heads to the polls. We look at some of the big issues shaping this context. Next.
Search no more, it's here, fun and joy, endless cheer. The memories so dear, after years, still so clear. Live your favorite memory, Malaysia, land of memory. Keep your favorite memory, Malaysia, land of memory. Malaysia, truly Asia.
There are just 5 days of campaigning until the UK's general election, and the contest could be a close one. Polls suggest that Labour, the opposition party, is gaining on the Conservatives. On Saturday, the candidates will campaign in the north of England, and during their televised debate, Prime Minister Theresa May addressed one of the biggest issues right now. That's the environment.
Why haven't you signed a letter to Donald Trump condemning his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement?
I haven't, because I actually have spoken to Donald Trump and told him that the UK believes in the Paris Agreement and that we didn't want the United States to leave the Paris Agreement. The G7 leaders sat round the table last week and spoke to and told Donald Trump that the six of us told him that we believed the Paris Agreement was an important international agreement on climate change, that we wanted the United States to stay in it. I've spoken to him. I spoke to him last night about this.
What did he say?
Canada and Japan haven't signed the letter either.
In the same show, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn was pushed on something that he's long opposed, Britain's nuclear deterrent program, Trident.
What about the reality where you're faced with the prospect that you may have to use it? I'm just asking for a simple answer.
The reality is that we have to, obviously, try to protect ourselves. We would not use it as first use, and if we did use it, millions are going to die. You have to think this thing through.
And another huge issue in this contest, Brexit. It's striking how much Britain's political landscape has changed since its decision to pull out of the European Union. Most of the prominent voices that had called for the UK to leave are no more. Nina Dos Santos explains.
They were the faces, the headlines, and the driving forces behind the Brexit campaign. But since calling the EU referendum,
I will go to Parliament and propose that the British people decide our future in Europe through an in-out referendum on Thursday, the 23rd of June.
most of the men behind the country's momentous decision have hardly stuck around to pick up the pieces. David Cameron, who staked his career on the UK choosing to stay in the EU, resigned almost immediately after losing the vote.
I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
Now he's making a fortune on the speaking circuit and has built a reported $30,000 shed in his backyard to write his memoirs in. One of the most vocal proponents of Brexit was Nigel Farage.
And if everyone that agrees with us goes out to vote on June the 23rd, we will make it UK Independence Day.
For years, he's waged a war against the EU.
I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives.
Now, he's no longer head of the UK Independence Party and is instead forging a career in radio and TV.
Good evening, everybody. Well, I think I was the last to know.
And making friends with Donald Trump. Also getting close to Trump, Michael Gove, Cameron's former Justice Secretary who led his party's hard Brexit battalions with misleading claims of huge savings to be had for the health service. He stood for the party leadership and lost after knifing his wingman, Boris Johnson, in the back. Gove, a former political writer, has now returned to journalism, scoring a major interview with the US president in his first month on the job. Always entertaining.
I can sing the ode to joy in German. Freude, schöne Goethe, funken. Anyway, you know it.
If not always liked. One of Brexit's most colourful characters is the only one left in the British government. Boris Johnson was made Foreign Secretary by the new Prime Minister Theresa May. But he's largely been sidelined.
Boris is sitting perfectly comfortably and with an air of repose about the fellow.
Nina Dos Santos, CNN, London.
The Black Eyed Peas are bringing the love this weekend to two huge events in the United Kingdom. The hip-hop group will perform Saturday at the Champions League finals in Cardiff in Wales. Then they'll head to Manchester for Ariana Grande's One Love benefit concert on Sunday. It's going to honor victims of the May 22nd attack when 22 people were killed. And the Black Eyed Peas have just the song for this, Where's the Love? They spoke to CNN earlier about what that song means for them and their public.
That song, Where's the Love, was created after the events of 9/11. And still to this day, 2017, people ask for it. You know, people will go online and say, we need this song, whether things are happening in Paris or in the United States or in Manchester. That song speaks to the world, and it strikes a chord with the world, and we're glad that we're able to perform it. It's sad that when something bad happens, that song has to be the thing that we rely on to provide our perspective and our therapy for the people that need it. But we're just going to go out there with an open heart and just spread love.
Ahead of the concert, Ariana Grande visited fans at the hospital who were wounded in the attack at her previous show in Manchester. And we will have more on that concert next. We'll be taking a look at the weather for the Champions League and the Manchester concert with Karen McGuinness.
Indonesia, a culture in transition. Meet the people, trying to keep traditions.
We need to educate the people, the children, because the batik is our culture.
While creating a new modern identity.
Our mission is to draw global attention to the cuisine.
The Keepers, tonight on CNN. Russia, a vibrant country with a wealth of history and culture. And now, cashing in on a wealth of business opportunities. In a CNN special, John Defterios explores how the largest country in the world is positioning itself for global growth. Bold moves, complex relationships. From politics to economics, see what makes this country a major player in our world. Marketplace Russia, Sunday on CNN. Philippe Chatrier Court is raked and ready for Roland Garros to begin.
I love Paris. It's a magical place.
The best tennis players in the world are finding their feet on the red clay. Can Novak Djokovic extend his reign over Roland Garros? Or will Rafa Nadal take it back and win his 10th French Open crown?
Definitely going to be the player to beat.
Join us at Roland Garros for a Grand Slam edition of Open Court. Tonight on CNN in association with Longines.
Welcome back. So two big events happening this weekend across the UK, a benefit concert in Manchester and the Champions League final. So is the weather going to play ball? Let's find out with Karen McGinnis, who has the forecast.
And Cyril, it looks like it's going to be fairly iffy. Typically, the forecast is a little showery across the region, and in fact, that's what we're looking at over the next 24 to 48 hours. Thanks to an area of low pressure that's been situated across the northeastern Atlantic and a frontal system draped to the south, but we get these little impulses that move beneath it, and as a result, that enforces or reinforces the precipitation. It's going to be heavy at times, not necessarily on Saturday. For the Champions League game, we're looking at probably temperatures right around 17 degrees, occasional showers possible. Certainly can't rule it out. But going into Sunday, that's a different story. Looks like the rain chances are really going to be enhanced then. So for the One Love concert, that's on Sunday evening. They're expecting about 50,000 attendees there. And unfortunately, about a 60 to 70% chance of showers. Also, it looks like the rainfall, not just the rainfall, but also the wind is going to be picking up here as well. But not just across the United Kingdom. We're looking at enhanced precipitation right smack across the central sections of the continent. We have seen quite a few storms erupt, especially across eastern portions of France and into Austria, right around Berlin. Over the last several days, we've seen quite a few storms being reported there. And the overall trend is going to be for temperatures that will be cooler all the way from Belfast to Dublin into Aberdeen, Edinburgh, looking at temperatures running a good 2 to 5 degrees cooler than is typical for this time of year. But not just there, it begins to spread in across the north central sections of the continent as well, while that warmer air kind of gets squeezed a little bit further towards the southeast. Hot temperatures expected in Portugal, also into Spain. Now, we've been looking at the Indian subcontinent, and prior to the onset of the monsoon season, and we know that there's been the onset already because of the severe flooding we saw just the last week or so in Sri Lanka that has claimed hundreds of lives. But now, just ahead of the monsoon, those temperatures really begin to soar rather amazingly, where the heat index feels like 50 degrees in some areas. So oppressive heat, but they pray for this rainfall. And Cyril, it looks like it could be a few more weeks away across north central India. Back to you.
All right, Karen McGinnis from the CNN International Weather Center. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching CNN Newsroom. We're done for now, but I will be back with the headlines in just a moment. Stay with CNN.